Good day to you. And is the TV on in your home right now? Because if it is, you're not alone. The TV is on in the average American home upwards of 21 hours per week. With each person watching TV on average 3 hours a night during weeknights or 15 hours per week. 15 hours of TV the average person is watching, although college students notoriously watch less because they're socializing more and they're also studying. But the average person points out how much TV is used by our culture, and that's what our chapter is about today, chapter 9, on television. And we know that the book actually starts with something that's sort of relevant not only to my being here in Mexico, but also the presidential campaign. It talks about George Ramos, that reporter that came over from Mexican television, Univision, and now is working in the United States as a Spanish language broadcaster. But he was the one, if you might recall, who questioned Donald Trump early in his campaign about how Donald Trump would plan to send back illegal immigrants to deport them and then readmit them back to the United States. And there was a bit of a confrontation there where Donald Trump had George Ramos, removed from the building, and then Ramos came back later and answered questions for Donald Trump. I don't know if you remember that moment, but it points out in the early part of this book how important Spanish language is becoming. Spanish language broadcasting, I should say, is becoming. So let's dig into some of the history of television so that we better understand this medium. And we'll start really with the point that TV's power over time has shifted from the broadcasters to the audiences. It's gone from the people who make the programs being in control of when people are watching the programs to the people who actually watch the programs being in control of television. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Let's start, though, with the invention of TV. It was in 1923. There's a little bit of controversy up one row and down another, and up another row and down another. And this created the idea of scanning lines on a television screen in his mind, and eventually what would be used as the technology to produce our modern day television, to telecast vision. And so he's credited for it, but at the same time, a Russian by the name of Vladimir Zorkin was working for RCA Corporation, and David Sarnoff, the head of that corporation, remember him from the Music Box memo? Well, Vladimir Zorkin also was trying to get a patent for his invention of TV, but in the end, Philo Farnsworth got there first, and the ruling was that he was the one who invented television, but there's some controversy about who really did. We know that the very first sort of official TV broadcast was in 1939. It was from the World's Fair, held in New York City, and it was by the NBC network, previously a radio network. A radio network for the first time broadcast a television program in 1939. Then in 1948, there was a very strange period for television. It lasted all the way to 1952. 1948 to 1952, or 4 years, all licenses for television stations were suspended. You have to have a license in order to operate a TV station or a radio station in the United States. That's still true today, and it was true back then. Licenses were suspended because the government was a little bit scared about what television's power was to control the minds and behavior of people. Think about that. They put the brakes on TV because they were afraid of what it might do. It might change people into, I don't know, being against America or being racist or being warlike towards other nations. It's tough to imagine that time period. It is following World War II, so you can kind of understand the fear of mass propaganda. At any rate, the license was lifted in 1952, and now TV started to proliferate as more stations secured licenses and started broadcasting programs. And the very first show that we have that's known as a breakout show was I Love Lucy. This is a comedy. It's a black and white that probably most of your grandparents have watched. And it broke ground in a couple ways. Number one, it had a lead character, Desi Arnaz. He was from Cuba. He was the first not only Latin American role on television, Latin American person on television, I should say, but also this presented the first interracial marriage on TV. Lucy was a white Caucasian American. Desi was a Cuban. So the show broke ground in that area, but it also broke ground because they wanted to live in California, out with the other film stars. And they didn't want to do the show in New York City, where most shows were done live. So what they did was they arranged to move out to California and to record in front of a live audience, and then to ship it back to New York City to be broadcast on television. And they included things like the laugh track. You know, you hear a laugh track, it's pre-recorded to add humor into the show. So this show became a very long-running show, over 10 years. It was a beloved show by most families in America, and it had a huge impact on the way that TV shows were produced. Many shows are still recorded live today in front of live audiences, and then edited and then broadcast. Also, we want to mark during this time period the rise of community antenna television, or what is the precursor, the beginning of cable television, because there was a family in Oregon, and this is also disputed as far as to the historical accuracy, but there was a family in Oregon that lived out of range of the broadcast signal. Keep in mind, television had to be viewed by the signal being transmitted over the airwaves and picked up by a receiver and an antenna on your television, like two rabbit ears. This family in Oregon could not receive. They were out of the range television, so what they did was they strung their own cable, and they ended up with cable television. And that's the idea of getting programming, television programming from the source, which would be the network, to the homeowner through cable instead of over the airwaves. At the same time, we have satellite television developing. That's sending a signal up into the air, bouncing it off the satellite, and sending it back down into a person's house. And in 1975, we have HBO breaking out, the home box office breaking out as the first programmer to offer movies at that time to houses nationwide, but they would have to receive the movies by satellite, not by antenna and not by cable. One of the most pivotal figures for cable in the history of television was Ted Turner, still alive today. Ted Turner founded the CNN network. He had bought a really, really tiny UHF television station that stands for ultra high frequency, which is a kind of frequency that doesn't go very far. And it's only good really in big cities where you have lots of people living close together. But he bought this station in Atlanta, Georgia. So no longer was the programming just about Georgians and just about things happening in Atlanta. Now he started to offer programming like the cable news network, basketball. He owned the Atlanta, I can't remember the name of the basketball team. He owned the basketball team in Atlanta, and he later bought the Warner Brothers cartoons, and he just decided that he was going to use the vehicle of cable television to get programming nationwide. Next up, we want to mention the development of digital television. In 2009, the government forced every TV station that was broadcasting in analog, considered to be like the vinyl of television, to change over from vinyl or analog over to digital television in the year 2009. They forced TV stations to do that so that they would be able to have a standard for the way that they broadcast their content across all TV stations, no matter who owns them. We want to say also that HD TV comes along in the 1980s. It's hard to believe that it's that old, but it is. And HD TV was first used to broadcast the NASA Space Shuttle Discovery going up into the air. And of course, now you can see every wrinkle on every person's face if you're watching HD TV. Let's circle back now and talk about the networks, a concept that we introduced for radio. The networks is a collection of either radio stations or TV stations. And the network, I should say, is the collection of TV or radio stations. The network studio produces a program, usually in New York City or California, sometimes in Chicago, Washington. They produce a program and then send it out to all of their network affiliates. Affiliates are the individual stations. Network doesn't have a station. Network is a collection of agreements with stations and a studio that sends out the content to these stations. The affiliates are the ones that decide whether they're going to carry network programming, and they usually do it in the evenings during what we call prime time, 8 to 11 p.m. at night, because that's when the biggest audience is watching TV, and that's when the networks are able to produce the highest quality programming. They produce better programming than a city station like WCAU in the Allentown, Bethlehem area, or any New York or Philadelphia TV station. The networks are bigger, they have more resources, more money, they can produce better quality programs, and that's why affiliates carry those programs in the evenings when the audience is the biggest. And under the financial arrangement, what happens is the network pays the affiliate to carry the programming. So the reason that works is because the network includes inside the programming advertising slots. So the network sells those advertising slots and gets the money from most of those slots, almost all of them, and that's the way that the network generates revenue. It's an ingenious business model, and it makes the system possible. All right, now let's go on to public broadcasting. We mentioned in a previous chapter that public broadcasting was established by the National Public Broadcasting Act in 1967, and what that led to is PBS, which most of you do not watch. Some of you may, some of your parents may. It's geared towards educated people, mostly in their latter years, and also young children watching Sesame Street. It's a public service. It's not designed to have advertising. It's just supposed to be unbiased and slightly intellectual. The Fox network comes along in the 1980s and completely shakes things up. Rupert Murdoch, the Australian, moved to the United States, took up citizenship just so that he could buy a collection of stations and turn them into the Fox network. You have to be a citizen to have a network in the United States. And he launched this network. It was slow going early on, but he came up with some really innovative programs, not him personally, but his network. The Simpsons is one, still on today. Married with Children, you might have seen in reruns also. Still a very racy program, even by today's standards. And he launched competition for the other three networks, which had a kind of oligopoly. That means complete control over the industry for many years. ABC, CBS, and NBC. So Fox shakes that up, and Fox is a big network today. The way that stations, by the way, measure their audiences is through a company called Nielsen. You may have heard of the Nielsen ratings. The top 10 Nielsen rating TV shows is commonly published. Nielsen surveys audience members. They use a people meter. It's a device that sits in your home and takes note of what shows that you at least have on television, even if you're not watching them. And then Nielsen produces ratings. And those ratings are how big your audience is. And those ratings are then used to determine advertising prices. The Super Bowl can fetch $3 million for a 30-second ad because it has the highest ratings traditionally of any TV program all year long. TV has been criticized for diversity in its past. In the beginning, a lot of TV characters weren't even the ethnicities that they were playing. Like David Carradine was a white guy playing an Asian in Kung Fu television. And you can look at the census on page 232 and really judge for yourself, because the census talks about how diverse our nation is. That whites number 64% of the American population. Hispanics come in second at 16%. African Americans 13%. Asians 5%. More than one race, an increasing demographic. Multiracial 3%. Some of you may be in that category. And so now ask yourself, are the number of the people that you see on television, is 64% of them white, or is it more than that in your gut instinct? That will tell you your own conclusions about television. Of course, it depends on what you're watching, right? Your sample. But speaking of diversity, we do have Spanish language programming making a lot of advances in the American TV landscape. Univision is the 5th largest network now behind Fox. It's broadcast out of Miami, and it's a Spanish language network. And one of the most popular programs is a kind of program that all of Latin America has been watching for a long time, and that's the telenovela. The telenovela, or telenovel, is a kind of soap opera, a very dramatic soap opera, and Mexico and Brazil produce those soap operas, and they're very famous all over the world. All right, let's go on to Black Entertainment TV. BETV was founded in 1990 specifically to appeal to African Americans. It's done very well. I believe it's owned by the Viacom company today. It launched really the first attempt by television to restore that balance of ethnicity. Now moving on to TV and society, one of the former FCC commissioners, Federal Communications Commission commissioners, his name was Newton Minow. He called TV a vast wasteland. I don't know if that's in your book or not, but he's critiquing, as many people do, that TV turns people into mush. It makes them gain weight, because to watch TV you do it in a lying down position for the most part, and the coffee table makes it just so convenient to have snacks at your side, and it's very difficult to get up from the couch sometimes when you're watching TV, or even to go to bed without having the TV on it. TV's criticized for making people lazy, creating obesity problems in the United States, and turning people and their minds into mush, not able to respond to people. If you talk to somebody who's deeply into a TV show, a lot of times it's like talking to a zombie, it seems. But is TV really responsible for that, or is the audience itself? It's something for you to consider. TV, like film, had standards developed to let the audience know what kind of content they're going to get in terms of pushing the boundaries of sexuality, profanity, drug use, and just basically adult themes. So you can read about those standards. They came into practice in 1997. They're not that old. And part of the problem, though, is deciding what exactly indecency is. That's the book talks about decency as being something that the FCC insists on, and they will fine you if you broadcast indecent programming. And the big case that brought this to the forefront was the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake halftime show. I'm sure you know about it, even though you were very young, in which her breast was exposed during what looked like a choreographed segment of a song that they were singing. Also at the same time, NYPD Blue, a drama, exposed a man's bottom. And so a lot of America was outraged. The FCC fined the stations that were involved in this CBS broadcast, and then eventually it was thrown out of court. So we're kind of in limbo as to what exactly is allowed. But we do know that the American public, at least on free television, has a low tolerance for nudity, whereas we see nudity is very common in Europe. Almost every single night you'll see some kind of drama with some kind of scene where it's just natural for the person's hopping in the shower, or two people are making love or something like that. It's shown, not graphically of course, but nudity is shown in that context. So where do we go now with TV? Well, one direction is interactive TV. TV is no longer appointment television. I've used that term before, where you have to sit down for every single show that you like. Now you can find those shows archived on YouTube. You can stream those shows. You can save them on TiVo. You can buy those shows from on-demand services. At the same time, TV also allows the audience to be incorporated into the way that content is created. Dancing with the Stars, American Idol, all of these shows, The Voice, they have audience input. The audience affects whether people stay on the show or not. And oftentimes that has a huge effect on the direction of the plot. And people at the same time are also tweeting and posting and Instagramming and Snapchatting about what television that they're watching. And that is also incorporated into television. You get to go to the website and you get to see the outtakes from a particular show in the way that it was recorded, or the parts that are not available on television. So TV is much more active today. People are not just sitting blankly in front of the TV screen. They're doing things with their hands. They're inputting into the TV show. And that brings us to the final point now, is that we are going to continue to see a convergence of television and the internet. We're going to see TV being broadcast over the internet and internet stuff being broadcast over television sets. Our flat screens already look like a combination between computer monitors and television, but still there is the problem of getting video to be broadcast on the internet. There still is a bottleneck there as far as what the bandwidth requirements are, and it's really what has impeded TV more than anything else, in my opinion, as far as being completely available on the internet. There are other factors as well, and we'll discuss that when we get to the internet. So this then wraps up our talk show, our instructional video lecture on television. I do want to make note that I'm not being a traitor to ESU by wearing my Millersville shirt. I am an alum of Millersville, and otherwise I'm loyal to East Stroudsburg University. All right, so with that note, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for checking in.